all of the situations that can either quietly disappear or become front page disasters.
And in moving fast, that's when we make the errors. I'm seeing that the exposure can come in many different ways, but it often comes from their people. Your employee, that's not your buddy. Use AI almost like an intern. And sometimes you are the brand.
Welcome back to Beyond the Bio. This is the show where we explore the human side of success, the decisions, challenges, mindset shifts, and relationships that rarely make it into someone's professional resume. Today's guest is somebody who operates where business, reputation, and risk all collide. Joining us is Ashley Futrell Hinkson, founder of Hinkson Law, a national law firm representing companies, executives, and high-profile individuals where the stakes are high and the margin for error is small. I am super excited for this interview today. Ashley's background is incredibly unique. She has worked in big law. She served as an assistant district attorney in Manhattan, an assistant United States attorney, and even served on a presidential transition team. Incredible. Today, she helps leaders navigate employee disputes, internal investigations, contracts, workplace compliance, and all of the situations that can either quietly disappear or become front page disasters. I am super excited about this conversation. And, Ashley does not just help people after things go wrong. She helps them spot the risks that they don't even know existed before they become an expensive problem. Ashley, welcome to the show. Super excited to have you today.
Thank you so much, Ben. I'm really excited to be here as well. And thank you for that introduction.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, Ashley, you've had an incredible career. You've gone from prosecutor to founder of your own national law firm. Walk us through that journey and what led you to build Hinkson Law.
Yes. So I wish I could tell you that when I was in law school in my first year that I would tell you that I would be here right now with my own law firm, but that would definitely not be true. When I first went to law school, I saw myself in a very different way. I thought I would go straight to a large firm practicing corporate law. But when I was in my first year of criminal law, in the first year of law school, second semester, I had a professor who she assigned us a mock trial, and I was assigned the opening statement. And once I finished, and once my classmates and I finished the mock trial, our professor really spoke life into us, and she told me that she could see me as a trial attorney. And there was something about those words that really stuck with me. So I decided to pursue prosecution right away. I went right to the courtroom after law school to the Manhattan DA's office, and then as a federal prosecutor, as you mentioned, in the U.S. Attorney's office. And that's where I was able to really get my first start into, what risk really looks like and how to be a zealous advocate, right? Whether it's for a victim who I was representing, as a prosecutor on behalf of the state of New York or the United States as a federal prosecutor. But what I learned from those experiences and quickly translated into larger law firms is that whether it's criminal law, whether it's business law, or even if it's employment law, that we have to be aware of those risks that we don't always see. So that background really serves me really helps me as I try to work with clients and help them to avoid costly errors that I see and that I'm able to see many months before they're able to. That's the service that I can provide to those clients.
That's awesome. I love hearing the background. When you mentioned that you were, when you became a prosecutor, I guess, does that still shape how you advise clients today?
It absolutely does. So when I was a prosecutor, we had tons of cases, and on any given day, we had to stand up and actually put those cases on in terms of trials if we were ready. And if opposing, counsel, if they were ready as well. And what I learned from that experience is one, you being able to be prepared for any situation that comes my way, but also ensuring that, my client is aware of the procedures, what's going on, and that I'm always communicating with them. But also what it taught me as a prosecutor is that there's many sides to a story, and we always want to make sure that we're not doing something, writing something, eventually show up, whether it's in a headline or something that could come up, unfortunately, if one of my clients is deposed, right? If they're in a deposition and what they've written in a text message or on Slack or Teams, we don't want that to come up and negatively affect them. So, those are all the types of skills that I learned as a prosecutor as I was building cases for trial. Now I try to help my clients to avoid those costly mistakes that could come back later to hurt them.
That's awesome. So tell me a little bit about your backstory. What brought you into law in the first place?
I have to credit my mom, actually. When I was younger, I was one of those kids who talked way too much in school.
Yeah.
And, my family decided to my family decided to enter me into speech competitions. So, from an early age, I was very young, and I would write speeches and then present them in front of audiences. At the time, I just thought it was fun. It was a little nerve-wracking at first, but later on, I realized that, being able to speak in front of audiences was definitely a skill that has served me very well. And just through that experience, I realized that one, I would really enjoy being in front of a jury in a trial setting, but also because I had a passion for my community and helping others,
Yeah.
that they both dovetail together really nicely. And I realized that, a future in the law made sense for me. And also just it was a way for me to give back as well. So that's actually what brought me into this profession.
It's funny you mentioned that you would enjoy being in front of a jury. I don't hear that very often from anybody. I guess, but that but I can see it. Being doing the public speaking. Yeah, that makes sense. So you now own your own firm. What was that for you? What made you want to open up your own business instead of just staying with the traditional law practice?
Well, it's interesting because, again, growing up, I was extremely risk averse. I loved the idea of being able to have a steady paycheck every couple weeks and wonderful benefits. That was just cushy and comfortable for me, and I loved it. But as I continued on in my practice, I realized that I wanted autonomy. I wanted the ability to bet on myself and to try different things. I
Yeah.
actually created a practice group. It's called Crisis Law PR. And it was just a combination of some of the experiences I've had in the past with law, but also politics, because I went to school in Washington, D.C., and I worked in politics on Capitol Hill. And I realized that having my own firm would allow me to really develop those practice areas and really offer a different type of service to my clients, something that I couldn't find just in a traditional law firm. So I really wanted to take a chance on myself and just try to see if what I thought about myself was true. And so far, I will tell you, entrepreneurs, I tip my hat off to you because we do it all, right? We definitely do the work. So we practice law, but we're finance, we're HR, we're IT, and we pretty much are every department within the company or within the law firm. So I am learning just how much goes into being an entrepreneur and starting your own law firm. But it's rewarding, but it's a lot of work.
It's a lot. It really is. Like, how does it feel now that you're no longer you're now in your own company, you're in your own firm with all of the hats that you're having to wear? Is it a good feeling? Is it still nerve-wracking?
It's a little bit of both. And I think that's good. There's a lot of adrenaline, that I have, but also there's the pride. I feel really good about the work that I can do for my clients. And I'm excited. So I think I have all of those nerves sort of wrapped in to one experience. But I will say that, I wouldn't replace this with anything else. I wish I would have done it years ago.
I hear that a lot from a lot of business owners. It's the one thing where it's like once you enter this realm, you never want to go back. Um,
Yes.
one thing that stands out is your ability to be able to see around the corners before problems explode. What is the biggest legal or operational risk that business owners overlook until it's too late? Hmm.
It's interesting that you asked that because one of the things that I tell clients all the time is, founders, business owners, we're always in a rush, right? We're always in a rush to get to that next big business decision. And in moving fast, that's when we make the errors. And one of the biggest, I would say, issues or compliance issues that I've observed is when it comes to your employees, often the wage concerns, right? How are we going to pay our people? And what often happens is that there are very stringent statutes, federal statutes like the Fair Labor Standards Act, where unfortunately some founders run afoul of that. They may not realize that, they're miscategorizing employees, or, maybe they're withholding tips or commissions from them. And again, it's not necessarily something that the business owner or executive is doing on purpose. It's just that they're moving so fast that they're not thinking about everything that's entailed when it comes to paying your employees or even hiring employees. So that's one of the things that I often see and I counsel my clients on all the time, is just making sure that we get a really good picture of their business, but also we consider, what are the potential risks that could come? If their employee leaves, right, we want to make sure they don't have any claims. We want to make sure that they, don't come back and bring any lawsuits or demands against the company. So those are some of the, in terms of compliance issues. Also, data breaches. We are in an era where almost every IT department around the country, they're busy and they're trying to make sure that, we're compliant, that our data is secured. And data security, that's one of the largest and most common crises that I see from businesses across the country. So those are just some of the compliance issues and things that I talk to my clients about, just to make sure that they are protected at all costs.
That's fantastic. It sounds almost like how we advise business owners in the financial planning space, the risk that could be associated with having employees and just operating the business. But where do companies tend to be exposed most often? I know you mentioned the, withholding tips and whatnot, but what are you seeing out there?
I'm seeing that the exposure can come in many different ways, but it often comes from their people. It comes from employees within. What I mean by that is sometimes, it's about the training, whether or not you have the right manager in the right spot. But also, if you have internal HR, which hopefully every business has it, what do you do when you receive a complaint? Are you building the kind of culture where your employees want to come to HR and talk to them about what's going on? Those are all things that really help these our businesses. One of the things that I sometimes see is there may be an executive who hears a complaint from an employee, but maybe sweeps it under the rug, or they think it's no big deal. It's rarely no big deal. And those are often the situations that come back to haunt us. So, those, when it comes to the people part of the business, that's usually where there's the most risk that I see.
That's awesome. I'm going to put you on the spot for a second. Can you think of any, without naming names, but any stories come to mind that might be able to help the audience with understanding the situation and how this could unfold?
Oh, absolutely. So, I'll just give you an example. Let's say that, like, I've had a situation where an employee had an issue, right? A concern about a work trip. And I will tell you, as an employment lawyer, the work trip is usually where unfortunate things can happen. But this particular client of mine had a work trip. And unfortunately, there was an executive of our company who was, trying to encourage everyone to drink a large amount of alcohol, and to go to places that she didn't want to necessarily go, that she didn't think was necessarily appropriate for a work outing, and she felt very uncomfortable. And afterwards, she talked to her manager about what happened, and the manager brushed it off. This person's there, they want to be there, it's your choice. It was just, that employee did not feel heard. She felt like she knew that something didn't feel right, but she didn't quite know what it was, but she knew that that was inappropriate. And, we talked about it. We looked at some of her company's policies and procedures, and we realized that there were many policies that were violated.
Yeah.
There were harassment, sexual harassment, as well as other policies that, in terms of their alcohol policies, that were absolutely violated. So that's just an example where sometimes the executive will put you in a tough position when they don't take the concern seriously, when they brush it to the side, they don't do a thorough investigation through human resources.
That's a great story. I think there's a good point to that, and I think a lot of people can probably relate to situations like that. Those who might be in the military, federal service, going on various trips with coworkers, and they get together, go to the bar, whatnot. I think that's you bring up a really valid point there. And it's something to definitely be aware of from the business perspective. I don't think a lot of people really think about. I guess how often has that run into or have you run into that with other people, with business owners especially?
Countless times for
Yeah.
years.
Oh,
It's
really?
always a yes, it's always about the work trip, and it's the text messages that come after the work outing at the bar, right? It's the supervisor who sends a couple of text messages to their employees who they feel comfortable around. And, I
Yeah.
always try to advise, my clients, and I tell them, "Your employee, that's not your buddy, that's not the person, who you need to send those text messages to, or the memes that are a little bit suggestive, right? Because
Hmm.
again, what I often hear from my clients is, well, I thought we were family. I thought we were a family. I'm so surprised that my former employee is suing me or suing the company. I thought we were a family. But in
Yeah.
reality, that's not your family. I mean, in certain cases, you may have a family member, who works with you or maybe is a co-founder. But in most cases, when you have an employee, that's not the relationship. So I always have to remind my clients that you have to keep it professional. And if you're
Absolutely.
unsure of what that looks like, give me a call. We can do a training. But in this day and age where, it's intergenerational at work, right? We have
Hmm.
different ages, different groups, different backgrounds. We can never be too comfortable. And we have to
Sure.
make sure that we err on the side of being professional in these environments.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I hear it all the time, right? We're a family-oriented business, whatever that saying typically is. And you're right, business is business first and foremost because, I've even seen it, I'm sure you've seen it too, where two brothers or a really best friend two best friends can go into business with each other, and all of a sudden it ends up in this major lawsuit, pointing fingers at each other. Is that something you've seen as well?
I have. Unfortunately, I have seen family members. One family member will send a demand letter, which is essentially the beginning of a pending litigation or a lawsuit, to another,
Right.
alleging all kinds of different things, whether it's personal, whether it's something that happened in the workplace, whether it's harassment, etc. I see it all the time. And look, there are definitely times where my founder clients, where my executives, where their personal life can come into their business life and can
Yeah.
affect the business. And that's just, again, something that we have to be aware of. We have to be aware of our actions, but also, and this is the part that I often experience, is that sometimes my clients aren't necessarily running afoul of any regulations or rules, but yet they're still subject to scrutiny, or there's still a demand letter or a lawsuit that's filed against them, even when they are convinced, and through a thorough investigation I've seen as well, they are not liable. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, that's one of those things where, I tell my clients all the time, when you have something valuable, whether that's your career, whether that's your net worth, your contacts in the community, your resources, you're at risk. And there are
Yeah.
people, especially in society, who are looking for, they're looking for a payday. They're looking for some opportunity to take you down. And what
Hmm.
I want to make sure is that my clients are protected and that they are not risk. They're not put at risk in those situations. That's the best thing that I can do, honestly, in trying to serve them.
Absolutely. I know you've mentioned quite a few times, your work does involve catching risks, especially that clients don't see. Let's talk a little bit about contracts that they might sign. Business owners, we tend to move quick, and I'm sure you're seeing it now. That now that you're running your own practice, we like to sometimes rush into things. We like to see that shiny object and go, oh, that's gonna be great for the business. How do you work with, business owners and entrepreneurs who want to move fast and sign deals quickly? What should business owners think about before they engage in these contracts or in these different relationships with other, whether it's vendors or other partners?
Yes. So, a couple of things. First, I always tell my clients, you have to read the contract. You'd be surprised how many people just want to sign and move on, and they want to assume the risk of whatever is in that contract. So, the first thing I tell them is you have to read it. But also, don't be afraid to find an attorney who can help guide you through it and point out risks that may be associated. I have clients all the time. They'll call me about a franchise agreement, right? They want me to review it and give them thoughts, or maybe it's a vendor agreement, and they want to know, what's going on here and what are my risks and what am I not seeing? Those are the clients who will actually save themselves so much money in the future in case there's something in that agreement that they don't know and that they violate later. And again, when comparing the cost of an hour or two of an attorney's time to what can happen, unfortunately, if you have to defend a lawsuit in the future based on that contract, most of my clients find that doing that prep work ahead of time is absolutely worth it. And it actually saves them in the end.
Got it. So what kind of clauses would be like a red flag immediately that you would look at?
Yeah, so it varies, but oftentimes it's things like non-disparagement, right? It's this idea of if something were to happen to you within your employment, are you able to talk about it, and what can you say about it? There's also non-competes. I'm sure many of your clients, and I know mine, have these restrictive covenants and contracts that they sign, and they may not
Mhm.
even realize the length of time, right, of that non-compete, the jurisdiction where that geography is. You know, if they're not at that particular location working in that job, are they able to work anywhere in that state afterwards or in a particular geographic area? Those are all things that sometimes we just rush to sign, when an
Yeah.
employer presents them to us at the beginning of an opportunity. But later on, upon exit, they really become an issue. And there are employers out there who are absolutely making sure that they enforce those restrictive covenants, the non competes, the non disparagements, the non solicitation. That's another one that I often find is that sometimes my clients will leave one opportunity, one job, move to another, and they want to bring along their friends. But unfortunately, they've signed a non solicitation in their prior company, and they're running afoul of that. So again, it's
Yeah.
just reading the contract and understanding what it says, and just taking a little bit of time to just get some advice on what it says and what it means, because that's what really becomes an issue later.
Sure. Yeah. No, contracts are such an interesting topic. I'm gonna bring this up because it just seems to be the talk of the town right now. AI, right? Let's just let's just talk a bit about AI. I actually spoke with a guy yesterday, and he was working on website development for people trying to build up a portfolio to showcase to larger corporations. He's young, and he had mentioned that a lot of the contracts that he puts in front of potential customers are generated from ChatGPT. So already that screams a red flag to me from a non-legal standpoint. But what would you tell somebody who's doing that, who's using AI to just generate something, hoping that it's going to be upheld in court or protect them from a lawsuit of some kind?
I would say, first, let me just start off by saying that AI has some great benefits. Okay. There
Sure,
are
yeah.
things that it can help all of us in our industries, absolutely. But there are some things that are just not worth the risk. And when you're relying on AI, and it depends on the prompt as well, but when you're relying heavily on AI to draft your contracts and you don't have the experience to know whether Chat GPT or Claude did it correctly, that's a problem. There may be things that you're absolutely missing. And again, some business owners are willing to assume that risk. But the wise ones, the savvy ones, use AI almost like an intern, where
Mm,
they may get an initial draft, but then they run that draft by a licensed attorney or, a CPA, depending on the clause. And in those instances, Claude, ChatGPT, other types of AI, they may give you a start. They may give you some background information, but you have to check it for errors. I mean, I cannot tell
yeah.
you how many courts have ruled against attorneys who are filing motions with case law that doesn't exist. We've all heard about AI hallucinating, right? Chat
Oh,
GPT
yeah.
coming up with a case or something that just doesn't exist. And we just have to protect against that. So you have to make sure that, again, would you ever take an intern's work and just send it directly to a client? Probably not. So in this case, you have to also be careful that you don't do the same thing when it comes to your business and your risk. And the fact that, it unfortunately could land you on the front page of a newspaper or in the court of law. We want to avoid that type of reputational exposure.
Absolutely. I love your approach too of treat it like an intern. I cannot agree more. You would not give an intern or a document that intern created to a client. That's so powerful. I've not heard that before. I'm going to use that in the future if you don't mind. I have officially stolen it.
Of course. Tell everyone.
So, speaking onto that as well, I'm sure you've run into people who are like, "Hey, I know what I'm doing. I read X, law book or whatever." When should somebody absolutely involve legal counsel before a deal closes? Or even, I would probably assume it would even be before the deal even begins. But I guess where would that absolute factor be if there even is one?
Yes. So I would first look at the person, right? What's their experience? Is this someone who's been, a practicing CPA, or maybe they've been in their industry in the sales role for the last 30 years? That's going to be a little bit different from someone who may be starting out in their career. However, I
Sure.
would say, regardless of your experience, it's really important to vet the opportunity. And I would suggest that you bring in legal counsel earlier than you probably anticipate. You want to make sure that you know the all sides of the deal, right? You want to make
Mm,
sure that you're aware of who you're partnering with and who and what are, it's like your due diligence, what are the things that you need to know about this deal, the transaction, the people involved, any risks associated. And I would strongly suggest that you engage legal counsel as early as possible. Again, if there's nothing there, then that attorney's job is pretty quick, it's pretty easy. However, if they find something that you may not have known before, again, it's going to save you in the end. But
mm.
getting in front of it, that is something that I always advise people. You have to get in front of the risks that you don't see, because that is the thing that could derail your company. I always ask people, I usually take a survey when I talk to groups of people, and I say, raise your hand if you've encountered a situation that could be nothing or it could completely blow up your business. And most of us raise our hand because we've encountered a situation probably that day where, again, it could be nothing or it could be everything. And so we want to make sure that we figure that out, ahead of time rather than dealing with it down the road.
Absolutely. So, what would you say separates a sophisticated business owner or business operator, entrepreneur from inexperienced ones when it comes to protecting themselves?
Well, I would say the sophisticated business owners, they've seen it all. They've been there before, right? And they don't put anything past the people around them. Whether it's their family members, business partners, employees. It's always the ones who are a little bit greener, the ones who are a little bit fresher and newer to entrepreneurship, who I
Mm,
find tend to blindly trust the people around them, and they think that, oh, we're a family. Oh, I didn't pay this person properly, but what are they going to do? They'll be fine, Or again, on that work trip, they're acting like they're out with their college buddies rather than their a couple of their direct reports. So
mm.
again, it's the more senior, and honestly, there are times where the more senior executives will surprise you as well. But I will say the ones who tend to avoid that risk are the ones who are careful and the ones who don't put their guard down as much. They're really thinking about what would this email look like? Or, what would this text message to a colleague look like if it were on the front page of the New York Times? Or if, a vendor or a client saw it. And when you think like that, when you think about the fact that, hey, this could come up in a deposition if my company, were ever in a lawsuit, people who think ahead, right? And who do not just operate in terms of just their impulses, those who are able to control those impulses are the ones who I typically find tend to be more successful and who just kind of get it as it pertains to risk and compliance.
Sure. Yeah. And we see it all the time too, right? In the military, if it's a U.S. Marine that gets in trouble, the headline, Marine does X, it doesn't say who, it just labels the company or the organization. Same thing, in law enforcement or even like Apple as an example, right? Like, something happens, Apple engineer does X, or, it might name the city police spouse or does X. So that's a real thing, and we see that. That's powerful. So
Oh, it
okay, yeah,
yes.
go ahead.
Oh,
You ready for
I was
this?
gonna say, yeah, I mean, it definitely is. You have to think about the fact that you represent not just yourself, but your brand, and the
Yes.
fact and sometimes you are the brand, right? And so you have to be aware of that, and the fact that it's no longer just you. You're a part of this bigger picture. You're a part of this bigger entity. That's correct.
Absolutely. So, okay, are you ready? You ready for the rapid fire round?
Let's
Here
do
we
it.
go.
Let's do it.
All right. So these are as we all know, this is the rapid fire round where I'm going to throw out a lot of questions to you and just see if how quickly you can answer them. Just as quickly as possible. We don't need to expand, but here we go. All right. So name one business habit every entrepreneur should develop.
Keeping a record of all of decisions made and keeping a paper trail of important decisions in HR.
Oof, I like that one. Okay. One contract term everyone should understand.
Non-disparagement.
Awesome. All right. Biggest mistake executives make under pressure.
Moving too quickly and hiring someone based on just a feeling and not investigating and vetting them further.
What's one thing business should audit immediately?
Their policies, especially related to cybersecurity.
A leadership trait that you value the most.
Authenticity and showing
Ooh.
up authentically as yourself.
Ooh, good. These are awesome. All right.
Oh,
Last
yes.
one. Best advice you've ever received.
Doing the right thing never goes out of style.
Ooh,
Treat
solid.
well.
That's awesome. All right. This is not part of the rapid fire, but I know we didn't cover it earlier today. If you were able to go back in time and you were able to share something, if you could share with your prior self, call it your 20-year-old self, what would you say to yourself, knowing what you know now, if you were able to go back?
Yes, I would tell her she's okay. She's gonna be just fine. Don't take yourself so seriously and realize that everything happens in its own timing, and that if you do the reps, if you do the blocking and the tackling, you work on your layups, you'll be just fine in the future.
That's awesome. I love it. For someone listening right now, maybe you're scaling a company, hiring rapidly, entering partnerships, or just realizing that you might have blind spots. What final advice would you give to that person?
I would tell them to slow down. I would tell them to do an internal audit of their policies and procedures and also their people. But most importantly, I would tell them to really think about what does success look like for them in that role within that company. And when you do that internal audit and really analyze your people, your policies, and again, what your goals are, what success looks like, that actually gets you closer to ensuring that, you're not making any costly mistakes. But slowing down certainly helps you get there and really being thoughtful about what you're trying to accomplish. Those leaders who do that are the leaders who tend to have the most successful companies, but also they tend to stay out of the headlines and avoid risk.
Absolutely. That's incredibly valuable. Ashley, this was a really, really valuable conversation. And I think a lot of people listening, realize today that protecting business or in their own business isn't just about reacting to problems. It's about seeing them before they happen. So if people want to connect with you, learn more about your work, or reach out to Hinkson Law, where would be the best place to go? How can somebody get in touch with you to talk more about all of these different things that you do?
Absolutely. So first, you can visit our website at www.hinksonlawfirm.com. We're also on Instagram at Hinkson Law. I'm on LinkedIn. You can connect with me personally, or the firm is also on LinkedIn as well under Hinkson Law. And those are the main places where you can reach me. But I'm always here to do a complimentary consultation to, talk you through some of the questions that you may have. Because again, I'm here to serve my clients. I'm here to make sure that you focus on the business and let me focus on any problems that may be lingering so that you can focus on doing what you were built to do.
Awesome. Yeah, Ashley, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much for taking your time to be on the show. And it's been really valuable, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate this opportunity and for your questions. It was a great conversation.
Thank you so much. Well, that's the end of the show. Our next episode will be coming out in a week or two, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye for now.